watershed covers 262.1 square miles, which is all of Davidson County, and we are responsible for all of the water that enters any of those streams in a point source or non-point source way. Going to leave with some details. We have a 12,142 outfalls, and the number below the 41,366 inlets, that's kind of a hard number to get your head around, but as you drive around Nashville, you'll see inlets everywhere. And if you count them all up, and then we're required to have an inventory, there'll be 41,366, and we're supposed to keep them all clean all the time. There are 4,000 stormwater control measures in the county, and Metro actually operates 476 of them. We're required to manage and regulate the remaining 3,500. So beginning with the basics, why do we have a stormwater program? Well, number one, the Clean Water Act requires it. When it rains in Davidson County and a drop of water hits the ground, when it enters a receiving stream, we must have met the permit criteria for it to have done so. So that's called non-point source pollution. The point source pollution is, well, the point source discharge are the discharges from our wastewater treatment plants. They're regulated as well, but every other water drop that enters the watershed is regulated from a non-point source perspective. Second reason is the watershed can misbehave, so we have to control the flooding, and we want to enhance the citizens' experience of the environment, and everything we can do on a daily basis to take the watershed from one state to an improved state is what we want to do. We've got really good documentation and data to demonstrate that the health of the watershed has gotten much better in the last 15, 20 years. That's our permit. So every 5 years or so, TDEC issues us a permit to discharge into the streams, and that is delegated from EPA. So EPA is the regulatory authority, and they delegate regulatory authority to TDEC, who is our direct regulator. So if we're not in compliance, two bad things will happen. Number one, we'll be fined. And there's one major city in Tennessee that's an example that were out of compliance with their permit, and they were fined $100,000 in order to come back into compliance. So one of our goals, obviously, is to maintain compliance with our permit at all time. That way, we're not in a position of being fined, and we're also, as I said, enhancing our watershed. So, what do we do in stormwater? Not just from a project perspective, but we're going to go through all of the sections of stormwater and explain what we do. So there's maintenance, which is to operate and maintain the existing infrastructure. Development services, and the best summary of that is we don't want to introduce problems in the development process that we have to fix later, because we're doing that right now. In the 1930s, 40s, 50s, until 1989, you could develop in Davidson County without any kind of stormwater development criteria. So with the development review of all of the plans for new construction, we're able to make sure that the requirements of our stormwater management manual are met such that the water quantity is properly controlled and the water quality is properly controlled. We remain in compliance, and we're not introducing problems today that we'll have to fix 5 years from now, because that's not really smart. Master planning, we have Roger Lindsay in the back. His job is to operate the watershed from a flooding perspective. He has a great deal of responsibility to ensure that existing structures don't flood. So you may recall in the recent weeks, FEMA issued new flood maps. Roger is heavily involved in that. We're also heavily involved in storm prediction, flooding prediction. We use the SAFE tool for that. A lot of analysis on the streams from a hydraulic perspective. So from a master planning perspective, we're ensuring from a watershed level that we're not introducing flooding risks to the city. And then the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, that's the NPDES, that's the actual permit. And we improve and enhance water quality through regulatory compliance. We're going to step through this in a little bit of detail. So Ricky Swift is also in the back. You guys have probably talked to Ricky on several occasions. The maintenance side of the house, as I've said, they operate and maintain the existing system. So we have a very comprehensive and thorough stormwater system, and Ricky's got crews and some contractor help that are responsible for operating it and making sure it works to design. So some examples: ditch maintenance, masonry work on head walls, inlet cleaning and vacuuming of stormwater structures. Good example of that, we have what's called a Vector truck, which is a two-function truck. It has a giant vacuum cleaner on it, and it has a very high-pressure jetting system. So you can take high-pressure water, about 1,200 psi or so, and clear clogged storm drains, pipes, things like that. And after you clear them with the high-pressure water, you vacuum out the debris to make sure it doesn't reclog the system. So there are crews. This morning, they showed up around 6 o'clock and got their assignments. They went out in the field, and that's what they did. Today, the stormwater system operated pretty well because we didn't have any rain, obviously. So what they do is they try to ensure that when it starts to rain. So we've got some pretty significant data that we've tracked over the course of the stormwater program since 2002. But we started in 2009 because that's when the stormwater fee came into effect. So there's been 18,000 service requests to Ricky's process, generating 13,900 work orders and all those preventive maintenance hours. And there's some photographs of some ditch work that was done. We've seen this all over the county. So he also does the so-called A projects, which is capital construction to construct new stormwater infrastructure. So the $10.9 million on the capital are the projects that I'm mostly talking to you all about on the phone, is the projects that we bid with contractors, and they construct infrastructure that is required to control the stormwater. So from a maintenance perspective and from a capital perspective, there are close to 2,000 open service requests that are in the system that we could correct if we had several hundred crews, essentially. So that represents the backlog of routine maintenance that we need to do. Normally November is a very wet month for us. It hasn't been this year, but November and March, April are our rainy seasons. And when it rains really hard, obviously we're going to get a new influx of service requests. So we'll see a continual spike. And the reason I bring that up is that number, 1991, that's a static number just for today. Tomorrow, it's going to be a little bit bigger. The next day, it'll be a little bit bigger than that because the requests are rolling in faster than we can get the work done. So we're losing that battle presently. So here's how we get the maintenance work done. So step one is someone calls in and registers an issue that needs to be investigated from a stormwater perspective. So we send an investigator out and to take a look. And the first question we ask is it public or is it private? A lot of discussions are held with the citizens of Davidson County about private stormwater issues. And a good way to think about that is if you're a water drop and you fall out of the sky and you land in someone's yard and you transit into someone else's yard, that's a private stormwater conveyance, essentially. The government doesn't get involved until it reaches the right-of-way, and that's when we become responsible for the maintenance of the stormwater flow. The private property issue is a contentious issue sometimes, but we're not allowed from a legal perspective to get on private property and correct stormwater issues. So the maintenance crews, like I've said, they go out and they restore the function, and if the work order indicates that it's not possible to fix with existing crews, it's more complex than that, then we go through a construction bidding process to get it addressed. So priorities often come up. Obviously, health and safety come first. We want to make sure then any kind of human safety issue is resolved first. Then we go to public infrastructure being at risk second. But fundamentally, we're in the public health and safety business on stormwater as well as water and wastewater. So generally speaking, the maintenance stuff is first come, first serve. But if we find a geographic reason to combine the projects, we'll do that as well. These are some examples about what we work on in the culverts and ditches, installing and repairing storm sewer systems, ditches that have been filled in. Good example about that is a lot of older neighborhoods in Davidson County. The ditches are no longer defined because over the course of 40, 50, 60 years, erosion or leaf collection have made the ditches essentially disappear. So we have to go in and redefine those ditches. Collapsed culverts, once again, you look at older sections of towns especially, all those really small stormwater drains that go over, that allow water to pass underneath the roads, a lot of those culverts are collapsing. The metal has eroded away and allowed the dirt to intrude and blocked up those culverts. Talking about private property again, good example is the mowing grass along the ditches. We don't do that. That's something that highly labor intensive, but it's also private property. So we don't think it's, number one, a good use of labor to have my guys out there cutting grass in a ditch when they could be fixing other issues. Sinkholes on private property, that comes up a lot. It also comes up in reverse where the springs will surface in private property. We're not really in a position to go on to someone's private property and resolve that as well. Okay, so the investigations occur. One of the things we want to make sure that we do is when we have an issue that gets raised, we want to send someone out to look at it that's qualified to make an assessment of the work. Backlog right now is 1 to 2 months. And as I said earlier, the peak season is in the spring and also in November. On occasion, we'll bring in contractors to enhance our ability to get through those investigations quicker. But we have one investigator that's available to do that. So here's a generalized approach to how we approach the investigation. Number one is we'll meet with the property owner that makes the stormwater call. We'll document what's in the field. We'll look upstream and downstream because the important thing about that is if you've got an issue that is in one area of the street, as an example, there may be things upstream or downstream that we can resolve collectively and solve a bigger problem than the one that was introduced by that one citizen. We do an extensive mapping and documentation of what we've got, a lot of GIS, and that gives our designers the necessary information they need to proceed with the design. So in the first bullet there, if it impacts the existing stormwater function, we'll issue a work order and we'll go out and have our crews fix it. And if it's private property, then we discuss that with the property owner and we'll close that work order. So now we talk about who does the work. We've talked about the right-of-way. That's the MWS crew. They'll do the work. And then the small projects versus major projects. The small projects are annual contractors, and that's generally operating and maintenance expense. Casey Cooper manages that for Ricky. You probably talked to Casey in the past. Those are anywhere from $500 to $5,000. It's not going to be an extensive amount of expense, and it's something that we can do with an annual contractor. The major projects is when it's introduced in becoming a major capital program. So that's when it transitions from a project that we can't do with existing crews. So we talked about that already. Metro Water Services crews have replaced pipes up to 48 inches in diameter, but mostly, if you think about ditches, culverts, that's what they're doing. They're cleaning out storm drains, they're redefining ditches. Right now, these are our crews. We have 5, 1 inlet crew, 1 masonry crew, and 3 ditching crews. And that talks about what they do, and that shows the backlog. So the masonry crew, they go out and rebuild head walls. They do a really good job. It's labor intensive, and it can't be done quickly, because if it's done quickly, it's done poorly, and we'll be out there again doing it soon. So they have a backlog of 5 to 6 weeks. The inlet crews have a backlog of 3 weeks, and the ditching crews have a backlog, generally speaking, of 4 weeks. So to do the work, now we're talking about what's required to actually affect the work in the street. So the one call is required before you can dig in the right-of-way. You've got to call 811 and provide the opportunity for all the other utilities to mark their infrastructure so we don't hit their infrastructure. We get a lane closure permit from Public Works if necessary. We contact all the property owners to make sure that they're aware of the work that's going to be done. And then the work will be weather dependent, obviously, because if it's really messy outside, the work will be done in haste, done wastefully, and we'll be out there doing it again, but it is weather dependent. And then when we complete the work, we restore the infrastructure to the best degree we can. So that involves paving. And paving is expensive. It adds a significant amount of expense to the projects. Here's some examples of before and after. And the photograph on the lower left, that is not bad comparatively. I've been personally in the intersection right across from former Melrose bowling alley. In that intersection, it was a 4x8 culvert, and it was completely blocked for about 8 feet. And the crews hand dug that out. It was the only way we could do it, because there's no way to get a backhoe in there, obviously, or a bobcat. So on the left, that's an example of what the crews face, but that's not an egregious example. The inlet on the upper left, that's pretty representative of what we have. A lot of litter in Nashville. People toss a lot of things out of the car window, and one of the things to recognize is if you toss something out of a window, it's going to end up in a receiving stream eventually. So we send an inlet crew out, and they vacuum that out, and then the one on the lower left we jetted and then vacuumed up from the other end. So fiscal year 16, 409 head walls built and 24 repaired. So that's the masonry crew. You can tell they do really good work. It's high quality. They're very talented people, but there's only one crew, and they've got a pretty significant backlog. And that's a big number, 35,000 linear feet of ditch. And if you remember earlier, we had 2,400 miles, essentially, pretty much times 2, because there's a ditch on both sides of the road. So 35,000 feet of ditch that was redefined, but once again, there's a whole lot more demand than supply. There's some photographic evidence of their work. You can look lower left versus lower right. Before, there was no flow. After, they restored flow, and that intersection would have flooded with any kind of significant rainfall. So from a public safety perspective, you're not going to have the water standing on the road that would introduce the hydroplaning risk and things like that. So it's very important work. It just takes a little bit of time, and it takes some resources. So then you transition to what Casey Cooper does, and those are the 3 annual contractors that we have under contract that we allow them to bid. So if we have a project we need to get done, we'll send the projects to these 3 annual contractors. They'll bid, and we'll take the lowest bid, and they'll go do the work. So we can't just have the contractors show up and do that work either. Sometimes there's even easement acquisition on occasion, but you have to have right of entries to get even on private property to work in the right of way. So it's a little bit more of a complicated process than just calling somebody on the phone and say, hey, go out there and fix this. It takes a little bit more effort than doing that. So it takes anywhere from 1 to 2 months to get that bidding done and the work to be accomplished. So then we transition to the significant capital work. And this is important because this is government, but it's also demonstrative of the care we take with the resources. So you start with design, and then we go through what we call a PIF process, and that's internal, and that encumbers the money required to do the work, okay? So that's a prioritization project, and once Ricky gets the funding through the PIF process, then we're able to go to requisition, and that goes to purchasing. We get the approval internally and through finance. We issue the purchase order to the contractor, and then we assign it to the contractor, and then the work begins. So from a design perspective, this is what could happen. You have to survey, because if you've got the creation of new infrastructure, then you have the as-is, and you have to document what you have. So you have to have a survey done of the existing infrastructure. Then you have to design the solution based on the survey. And then one of the things that can take a lot of time is the TDEC permits. So if you are working in a blue line stream or near a blue line stream, you have to have the general ARAP, the Aquatic Resource Alteration Permit, that TDEC gives us, that permits us to get anywhere near the blue line stream. So if you're working near the stream, or you're creating a new discharge into the stream, that ARAP is required, and that's a permit that goes through TDEC. So there's a general ARAP that we can apply, or if there could be an individual ARAP if the change to the stream is extensive enough, and that requires even a public comment period. So the process to design and execute a capital project is a lot more extensive than one would think. And then once we do that, we get the right-of-way sign-off from Public Works, and we get the necessary permits to do that. And Public Works is a great partner with us. That's the funding process. We've talked about that. All these projects have to be bid, and it's usually through an RFP that has to be evaluated and awarded. So the purchasing process is external to Metro Water Services, which is a good thing because it separates us from the procurement process, but that takes a little bit of time. Then you might have to do easement acquisition, and that requires legislation. And y'all are well familiar with that because it's before this body on several occasions. But it has to go through several layers of review before it even gets to y'all. It's got to go through our Property Services Division at Metro Water, then it goes to planning, then to legal, 3 readings here. And on occasion, if it's an extensive project, we'll have a community meeting. We'll mail out letters to adjacent property owners, and then we'll begin work. Talked about 811. That's something we have to do before we do any kind of digging in the right-of-way. It protects our infrastructure as well as our colleagues' infrastructure from being damaged. We'll have a pre-construction meeting before we begin work. We have all our colleague infrastructure operators in the room, representatives, to make sure that we're not placing their infrastructure at risk, and we're also identifying if we have to relocate any of their infrastructure to accomplish a project. There's also 3 other utility districts in Davis County that we may have to coordinate with: Harvard Valley, Madison Suburban, and White House. And then, once again, we've got to talk to Public Works about the final paving plans. Then we issue a notice to proceed. That's when the letters go out to the constituents that you're copied on, and we do ongoing reports to keep everybody updated. One of the things about stormwater, it's 100% gravity flow. So we have to, on occasion, be very creative in getting the water from here to there. There are no stormwater pumping systems with the exception of the levee in Metro Center. So we operate that one pumping station, but everything else is gravity flow. We're all very familiar with the fact that Davis County is sitting on a giant piece of rock, and if we encounter a lot of rock and we have to dig a hole, it takes a lot more time. If you look at the Jefferson Street project, that excavation was 15 feet in some cases. So that's moving a whole lot of dirt, a whole lot of rock. So it's going to take time to get these done. that's indicating what we did. One of the things that's important to this council, I think, is coordination amongst departments and divisions. We did a water line enhancement in addition to the stormwater improvements while we were in Jefferson Street. And I think that we're also working with Public Works on the streetscape, and we're working with Parks to create to essentially provide the land for Parks to create park space along Jefferson Street. So a lot of collaboration is done on these projects as well. That's the detention structure. On Jefferson Street, part of the problem was it would rain and the water really wouldn't have anywhere to go. So the water will go underneath that park and be stored in that detention structure and released slowly, so it's not overwhelming the existing stormwater infrastructure. Talked about rain routes. So before it rains hard in Davidson County, Ricky's crews will go out and hit the hot spots in the county. There are areas that are known to have chronic flooding issues as well as chronic inlet clogging issues. So we'll go out and clean the inlets before it rains, and we'll also come back after it rains and clean them again. And that preventive maintenance has, it's impossible to quantify, but it has prevented a great deal of damage. The street sweeping, if you look at that number, we're not making that up. That's 8.6 million pounds of debris in 1 year. That if we didn't street sweep that, that would end up in a drain, it would end up in a creek, it would end up in the river. That's a permit requirement, but it's something we would do anyway. But that's 8.6 million pounds of trash that's tossed onto the right-of-way. We're set up into 4 grids, and they each crew has their own grid, and they go out and do their rain routes. The 21,000 miles of streets that we sweep annually, and it's mandated by TDEC. So this is an example of everything that was done in fiscal year 16 by routine maintenance. A lot of work. You can tell inlets clean, material removed, head walls built, driveway pipes. There's just a great deal of work is done out of the County Hospital Road location with only 5 crews. So I'm very proud of what they do, but they have a lot of work to do. So now we need to transition to development services. And once again, I talked about not creating problems with development. So essentially that's their mission, is permit compliance and to prevent future flooding. In fiscal 15, there were 2,572 plans that were submitted for review to development services. That's out at the Metro Office Building. And that shows the workflow. So essentially, it goes from everything from plan submittal to final inspection and getting as-builts. So without each one of those steps, we're not in regulatory compliance, and we're also introducing risk to the system by not having it built properly and built according to plan. So with the plans being submitted, once they're correct, we have an inspector that goes out and makes sure it's built to spec, and then we get the final as-builts to make sure it'll be operated to spec. The erosion prevention and sediment control, that's really important in that the #1 pollutant of our rivers and streams, not only in Davidson County, but in the United States, is dirt. Without keeping the dirt on the construction area, it will get to a receiving stream. And that affects the watershed and it affects the ecology of the stream. Excuse me. The bonds and deeds process, we have to go through a bonding process to make sure that when a developer brings in plans, they're able to build the plans to spec. If they're not able to do that, then we are able to revoke the bond and complete the infrastructure as designed. We do everything from subdivision review to infill review. A lot of work being done right now, as y'all well know, as infill. Not a whole lot of subdivision work. Most of it is infill, which introduces its own area and level of concern. Step 1 is you do sufficiency review, because it's important to make sure that you have all of the aspects of the plan correct before you go to technical review. So Mr. Anderson does a review of the plans to make sure they're ready to be reviewed. And then we go through the technical review process. And that goes into the Stormwater Management Manual that this body approves each year. If it meets the Stormwater Management Manual regulations, then a grading permit is issued. If it's not, there's an opportunity to go to the Stormwater Management Committee for a variance. But that's examples of everything that is looked at by the plans review process. Talked about infill review. That's a big concern right now because when you take one lot with one structure on it, you're usually going to be increasing the amount of impervious surface on that lot. There's a new rule that's required the initial inch of rain to remain on site, and that's for stormwater quantity control, but it's also a stormwater quality issue that we need to regulate properly. The ordinance that was passed in 2014 talks about that. There's some examples of the way to mitigate the runoff. That I think that's been really successful. It's allowed infill development to pursue without introducing additional stormwater quality or quantity issues. Here's master planning. I mentioned Roger Lindsay in the back. From y'all's perspective, you're mostly going to see this from a home buyout perspective. The FEMA maps is this as well. GIS mapping of all of our infrastructure. We're required to maintain a very accurate GIS database of all of our stormwater infrastructure. The management, like I said, is the floodplain mapping, and mitigation, generally speaking, is the home buyouts. The new maps came out. A lot more streams were studied, so we got better data from which to make decisions about development in the floodplain and in the floodway. And talk a little bit about the National Flood Insurance Program. We participate in that because it gives us a 10% discount for our citizens on their flood insurance. We're a Class 8, and that provides for a discount. There is a link that will show if a citizen's home is in the floodplain or not on the metronashville.gov website. Now we talk about the final area, which is permit compliance, and that's Michael Hunt's group. They do post-construction inspections. So what they do is they make sure that the stormwater infrastructure that was required to be installed from the Stormwater Management Manual, that they operate properly. And then they also have a compliance and protection element from a water quality. Dale Binder leads the grading permit oversight. So when a constructor is issued a grading permit, we're required to make sure that the site is managed properly. So as an example, the erosion doesn't cause harm to the receiving streams. And most importantly, this group makes sure that the stormwater infrastructure is built to spec. These are examples of what they do. Upper left is an erosion prevention and sediment control fence. Upper right, witnessing a stormwater piece of infrastructure going in. A lot of documentation goes on to make sure that we're not introducing issues that we have to fix later. We have a low impact development manual that Rebecca Doan essentially created, and what that's for is for development that provides for minimal impact to the environment. That photograph is the Music City Center, which is a green roof, but all kinds of activities involved with this manual to enhance our watershed. So watershed management, the TMDL, so total maximum daily load. What that means is a stream can only take, from a permit perspective, so much dirt, so much phosphorus, so much whatever. That's in the TMDL. TDEC will review that to make sure that we're meeting those requirements. And the 303D list, one of our fundamental strategic goals is to remove every stream from Davidson County from the 303D list, which is EPA and TDEC's list of impaired streams. Since 2008, we've walked 250 miles of streams. That's really important because you're in the field, the eroding banks, broken pipes. We found a whole lot of illicit discharges through this process, and it's given us an opportunity to document our watershed. We partner with Metro Police. We work with them on their helicopter. They have a thermal imager, and that photograph in the upper right shows a heated plume entering a discharge, entering a stream. So that's a temperature differential between the two waterways, and that indicates, it may indicate an illicit discharge. So the police officer, the police department's FLIR camera sees that. We'll GIS map it, and we'll go out and find where it's at, and we'll correct that illicit discharge. In this specific instance, the illicit discharge was a storm drain that was being discharged directly to the receiving stream. So this is essentially the final element of permit compliance. The industrial inspections, if you look on the left, that's a spill response. But when you look at a lot of companies have materials on site that we don't want to have leave the site. So they have requirements for containment such that if they have a leak, it'll be contained and not get off site. That's the kind of things that we inspect for. We go out and investigate citizen complaints about possible illicit discharges, and that's what Josh Hayes' group does. We have a requirement in our permit to do education. We have a great deal of presence in Nashville schools to educate children on stormwater quality issues. That's part of our permit. That's an example of all the activities done from a public education perspective. The rain barrels, 948 rain barrels, may not seem like a very significant thing, but that water is contained in a rain barrel, not introduced into the watershed, and people can use that instead of putting chlorinated water on their petunias. Talk about our fee a little bit, just to kind of give you some background. Our average is $7.18. We're the fourth largest MS4 in the country, and that kind of shows you where we are from a fee presently. If you ask right now from a snapshot perspective how much capital projects we have on the books, it's $207 million and close to 1,000 projects. So with each day, we're going to have more capital demand, but right now the number is $207 million. We have 1,900 open service requests, and if we had more crews, we could do more work. And that kind of concludes my presentation. So I appreciate y'all's patience in going through all that. Stormwater is a very extensive operation, not only from a project accomplishment perspective, but permit compliance, plans review, education. And so there's a lot that goes on besides project accomplishment. So welcome any questions that y'all have.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Scott, thanks to you and your team for offering this presentation tonight. Very helpful information here. So in my district, we've got a lot of infill development occurring, in fairly dense areas. And so we will frequently, for instance, in a given neighborhood, see erosion control fencing go up for a development project, and then inevitably in a couple of weeks it's kind of fallen over or whatever. What's the process by which erosion control is, one, monitored, and two, enforced, if at all?
Believe me, that's a maddening issue for me as well. Before you can issue the final grading permit, the EPSC has to be up and verified up by one of our inspectors. Once it's up and the grading begins, then a lot of times it's damaged and not functioning. We don't have many inspectors, so they each have a quadrant essentially of the county that they're responsible for. So the best way to do it is to call 862-4600 and make the report, or you can call your favorite Mr. Honeysucker, and he can get on it, that way. But it is a requirement, so it is enforceable.
And when you say enforceable, is it just, all right, you call them, or is there actually a penalty that can be applied?
We're in the business of trying to be cooperative. So 9 times out of 10, we'll go to the work site, we'll point that out, and it'll be immediately fixed. If we do have an issue with a developer or a contractor that refuses, we can issue a stop work order. If they violate that, well, actually, we'll issue a notice of violation. If they violate that, then we issue a stop work. So we do have the ability to cease work being done on a site. The good news is that doesn't happen very often because most contractors in town are very cooperative. It's an ongoing battle, though, because you get the fencing up, it's not very robust. You know, it's essentially plastic with wooden stakes, any kind of issue. But 862-4600, and we'll get someone out there and get it fixed.
Great, I appreciate that. I wanted to follow up. I know this issue has come up before in the Clean Water Program, and I think in the past there's been difficulty with kind of data gathering and the metrics. I'm just curious, have there been any updates to metrics that would allow us to introduce green source reduction strategically into the overall stormwater management program?
Green source reduction?
Meaning things like bioswales, et cetera.
We have all that in the LID manual, and we have all the data you could ever want.
Okay.
And what I'd like to do is get Rebecca with you and show you everything that we have. Everything's mapped. All that stuff is on GIS. All of our activities associated with it is documented. And we'll have Rebecca contact you, and she can show you a lot of information about that.
That'd be great. And then I guess related to that tangentially, what's the process by which new stormwater regulations are created?
Most of the time it comes directly from a regulatory perspective. The perfect example is the 1-inch requirement. We saw that coming about 3 years ago, so we introduced the LID manual and made it into a position where it was voluntary, and we kind of got the development community used to doing that. But it became a regulatory requirement this year, and we incorporated that into the Stormwater Management Manual. But that is a public document, and if you have recommendations, then we'd love to talk to you about it because this body does approve it.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Gilmore. Uh-oh. I have Mr. Cooper sitting next to me. There you go.
All right. Thank you, Chair Allen. Just 2 things. I guess one is a comment. I just wanted to commend Stormwater and Mr. Swift specifically for the work that was done on Jefferson Street. It's really exciting. I think a lot of the business owners and just stakeholders over there are really excited just to kind of pull that extra water that had been on the street for many years off, but not only that, to roll it into a larger project so that it also now has a civic use in that it'll be a park. So I wanted to commend you guys for that. That's really a big deal. And
we're really excited about it.
Yeah, we are too. I think everybody over there is really excited, and all the stakeholders and the collaboration. And then the second thing, this is low-hanging fruit. I saw where you said you do the street cleaning. I didn't realize you guys do. So I noticed the other night when I was driving that the street cleaners, the actual trucks were coming through, but then they had to go around the cars. And so I was wondering, is there a way, like I know when I lived in D.C., you say, okay, street cleaning happens on this day, park all your cars on this side, so that can be really effective. The truck was doing its job, but it's just that it had to kind of come down, it would be able to clean, then it had to go around, then it came back up against the curb again. And so if you could just speak to that and how we could help that to be a more effective process.
That's tough. And DC is a perfect example that they do have very specific rules. And, the bad news is that they'll tow if a car is parked when it's not supposed to be. We don't have that enforcement ability right now, and I'm not sure that, I personally want to go down that path quite yet. But as we enhance that process and make it a little bit better, maybe that's something we discuss. But right now, we don't have that authority, essentially, to work with the police department, as an example, to clear the streets, to do street sweeping. But that is something that could be improved. I agree with you.
I would add to that the schedule is on the Metro Water Services website, and I try in my monthly update to go to the schedule, and it doesn't take a whole lot of manipulation to kind of figure out what days they're going to be in your neighborhood. So I try to publish that when I can get it. It usually comes out about 2 or 3 days after the first of the month.
I just have one follow-up. Are we opposed to placing it on a sign and just telling people?
I wouldn't be opposed to that.
Okay, thank you.
It does change every month. Councilmember Henderson.
Chair, Mr. Potter, thank you so much. I want to commend your staff as well. Anybody and everybody that I've worked with in this year has been so very helpful. I wanted to inquire about infill development and the point at which the process for environmental practices is triggered. I understand that you have to have an 800 square foot add of impervious surface before there are certain practices that are put into place. And I wonder, how is that determination made when the developer brings you or your staff rather, the site plan for the proposed project? How does your staff make the assessment between what used to be on site versus what is proposed? And how do you make sure at that next inspection, which I understand to be just for kind of environmental fencing and so forth, I mean, do you actually look at the poured foundation and see, was that accurate as it was depicted in the site plan? I mean, are they giving you detailed construction drawings, or are they just, can you speak to that a little bit?
I'm not sure if we take a slide rule out there and get to the square foot, but when we do construction inspection, we do ensure to the degree possible that they're built to plan. To answer your question at the beginning, we do a before and after analysis. We have very detailed, actually the planning department has very detailed maps of the city, and they show what's on each parcel, and we're able to compare the impervious surface before and the impervious surface after. And if it's triggered, then it goes into the infill redevelopment review process. I do think we're pretty vigilant and diligent about making sure that the rules are followed, because it goes back to my statements earlier in that the last thing we want to do is create problems today that we've got to fix in a year. So we're going to do everything we can within our rules to prevent that from occurring. And we'll generally err on the side of caution because, as I've said, the developers in town are generally very cooperative. They want to build good product, and they want to follow the rules. So with our relationships, I think we've created an environment where we can do that. We did a 5-year review of all of our stormwater fee impervious surface calculations, and we found that we were about 87% accurate on the square footage. So we feel really good about what we've got, and we feel really good about what's required to be submitted. So I think Nashville is fairly progressive in regulating infill development. Stormwater is kind of an afterthought to the process, though. It's more of a planning issue, and then once the planning approvals are made, then the construction part is where we come involved, and we ensure that the stormwater management requirements are met. So when it comes to infill, we're kind of secondary. That's not really the right word. We're second in the process, I guess, is the way to think about it. But I feel good. I mean, we've got pretty vigilant folks that are tracking that, I think, pretty closely.
So if I have constituents who are adamant that more impervious surface is being added than was calculated, what's the best path to follow? Because I trust your department, yet I need to follow up on that concern.
I totally get that. And we're all about the facts. And what we'd love to do is, if you have a constituent that thinks that, then call us. And we will go through the process of showing before, showing after, and if there's an issue, then we'll correct it. We want that to happen. It really goes back to, we have enough to do. We don't want to make it worse. And we do think it's fair to the neighborhood to make sure that the rules are being followed. So we're all about that. If you have a question, please give us a call, and we'll take a look.
Great, I appreciate that. And then last question, for inspection purposes, when they go out to check on the fencing and everything to hold back the dirt and so forth, is that solely a check of that, or are they also checking on the matter of the square foot addition and the impervious surface?
The initial inspection is to issue the grading permit.
Okay.
So subsequent to that is to make sure that that the erosion fencing is operating properly.
Okay.
But they're also looking at the plans, making sure the construction matches the plans.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
It's soup to nuts. It really is. But the first one is to make sure it's installed correctly.
Got it. Thank you.
I might take a point of personal privilege. Could you speak in relation to that to how we might better deal with subsequent paving or building of swimming pools or patios? Because currently those are not permitted, and do we need to think about putting in place a permit process so that those things get included in a review process?
I wouldn't be opposed to that. Impervious surface is impervious surface. And if you look at a block or a square mile, when you add impervious surface, you're adding an additional demand on the stormwater system. So I'm all about review, and I'm all about balancing development rights with maintaining permit compliance.
Thank you. Councilmember Hagar.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Potter, thanks for being here today. I appreciate it. One question I wanted to ask, and this question I always get asked by constituents, how much money do we bring in on the stormwater fees total per year?
I happen to have that right here. So I'm going to give you the history. So in fiscal 2014, it was $14.325 million. In fiscal 15, it was $14.412 million. And last fiscal year, $14.537. So you're seeing a very flat trend because the rates haven't changed, but you're seeing a slight improvement for two reasons. One is we're adding parcels, but we're also getting better at collecting and also billing. We did the 5-year audit as required by the ordinance, and we had about 13,000 accounts that we had to improve, and we did that. So with that, we're seeing incremental changes, but that's a $200,000 window. So we're not showing a lot of growth, but a good number is $14.5 million per year.
All right, and what are we spending every year on stormwater and projects?
Well, when you go into O&M, we spend all of that because you've got O&M funding and you've got capital funding. So the last 5 years on the capital, that was funded by GO bonds, okay? The $14.5 million, all the O&M went to things like just to operate the system. You've got salaries, benefits, street sweeping, all the things that you do on an annual basis. All that money is spent. Excuse me. The C projects, those are O&M expensed. So that's the answer. So all of it is spent, it's O&M, and then on the capital side, the last 5 years has been funded by GO bonds.
When do we decide that something goes to the capital improvement side?
When we make the determination that existing crews aren't able to correct the problem, or a better way of looking at it is if you are creating new infrastructure. If controlling the problem takes something new, then a general statement is that's an A project, and that requires capital investment.
Who makes that determination?
Ricky.
Let me ask you this. How many engineers do we have?
Help me out, Rick. What do you got? Roger? Seven? Yeah, I mean, around 12. I mean, Ricky's got 5, and then development review around 7. I mean, I can get you the exact number. Ricky's a UT engineer, does that count?
Do we a lot of times
I'm sorry?
we a lot of times go to outside vending for engineers?
On occasion. We
How
do that
often?
for construction inspection and for design. We don't design in-house.
Don't design at all?
Small projects, but the A projects are designed by firms.
Well, the reason I'm asking that is that I had a note come in on an email about one project I had. They had the money for the engineering study, but they didn't have the funds to do the project, and it couldn't be done till 2020.
Well, right now, we've allocated that $50 million that was approved in 2012. So all that geo bonding has been encumbered. So those projects are going to be finished up, and right now there's 11 capital projects that are concluding. We've got 186 in design, and then 39 are ready to go. So
The reason I asked that, how do I explain that to my constituent?
I guess that's how I just did it. I mean, the 50 million has been encumbered.
Okay, so what can we do to rectify that?
We have to get more funding.
So in the meantime, they're just going to have a flooding backyard or water going over a road, right?
I guess.
What are the hydrology tests? You ever do hydrology tests? Does the state require that
I'm not sure
with
which you're
developers?
referencing.
Okay. All right, and then you said you have a bidding process with about 3 contractors. Is that correct?
Those are Casey's projects. They're required to, we have 3 annual contractors that bid on the C projects.
Do we have a breakdown as to how much we pay private contractors and private engineering firms versus in-house projects we do?
Yeah, we can provide that.
Can you provide that to me?
Sure.
Okay. And you said you got 5 crews right now, correct?
That's correct.
Those are for just O&M and small projects?
Right.
When does something become a large project?
When you identify that you have to create new stormwater infrastructure. If you can't, if the water quantity essentially is overwhelming the existing system and you have to build something new, that's generally when it transitions to being a capital project that requires an external design.
So it's not based on the amount then, correct?
It could be.
What that cutoff is?
There's no magic number for that.
Now, you showed earlier about some of these ditches that have to be re-scooped out. Does that require engineering or anything like that?
Generally, no, because the right-of-way we own, Metro owns, so we can work in our own right-of-way. And usually, that doesn't require a design because it's a crew with a backhoe or a I forgot the name of the truck, a backhoe essentially, and grade all. It requires a grade all, so we can redefine the ditches because.
So we do have the equipment to do that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you need to hire more crews as far as what we got now for 4 or 5 a week backlog?
It's a classic example of more crews equals more work. We have a lot of demand and minimal supply. With more crews, we could do more work.
Storm drains along the roads, like Oakley Boulevard and those areas, is that the responsibility of stormwater or public works?
It depends on, well, start with a state route or a non-state route. The state routes we don't maintain. The non-state routes we maintain, and that's our responsibility.
All right, who maintains the state routes, like
Just
Oakley Boulevard?
TDOT.
TDOT, okay. And do we get any type of state funds for any of this under the Clean Water Act?
No.
That's all I have now. Thank you, Mr. Potter.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Elrod.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to, I think I've told you this, Mr. Potter, privately, but I just wanted to, I went on a tour. Well, first of all, Mr. Honeysucker and Mr. Snyder, they're great. They've been great to work with, and I took the day-long tour of your facilities, and they were awesome. Your staff was was great, very professional, so I just want to commend you and everybody at Metro Water.
Thanks. Yeah, really cool stuff.
I have a few questions. First, what does MS4 mean?
Municipal Separate Sanitary Storm System.
Okay. All right. So, some of these questions have been answered. So, I kind of, well, I guess I used to think of, or I was under the incorrect impression that the stormwater fee took care of any kind of stormwater issue. But you're basically saying that The stormwater fee just goes to the smaller projects, but it also goes to not just the capital of moving dirt and that kind of thing, but also paying salaries, benefits, and that kind of stuff for the crews that work in the stormwater division. And then the capital project go into the capital improvements budget and is basically paid for by property taxes, sales taxes, just general taxes as we pay back the GO bonds.
That's a good summary. The good way to think about it is the 14.5 million is operating and maintenance, and that's going to be something that is contained within the year. If it goes beyond the year, that's a capital investment, and it doesn't make sense to pay cash for an investment that you're building that should last 50 years, for an example. So that is bonded. In the last 5 years, the $10 million per year has been funded through GO bonds.
In the slide, you had $207 million for 950 projects in your backlog. Is that the large capital projects?
Yeah, those are the A projects.
Okay. Out of curiosity, how much was that GO bond let for?
It was $50 million.
$50 million.
And it was issued in 2012.
Okay. Because I guess some of the questions that I had, I guess, are kind of moot, because what I was wondering is that the current funding or the current money that's coming on the stormwater fee is $14 million, $14.3 million a year. And if all of that were to just go to the backlog, that would take 14 and a half years to clear. And that's without, GO bonds to knock that number down. And even the last GO bond let was $50 million. And that's, how many years do we do that letting?
5.
5 years.
5 years, $10 million per year.
And that's just without anything else being added right now.
That's
correct.
correct.
That is the backlog that will only continue to grow. Because, and this is, I guess, in thinking of utilities, Metro Water, NES, most utilities, I guess for whatever reason I'm thinking of stormwater as a utility, is whatever the needs are is what the fee should be to meet those needs. So that it's not put on, property tax necessarily. Property tax goes to to the general budget, general fund, that the stormwater fee goes to pay for stormwater projects is what, I guess I had in my mind for whatever reason, and apparently it was incorrect. Because I was thinking of if there's a certain number of funds that we need to have every year to knock down the backlog, say in 10 years, that's what kind of increase that would be, or what is the, and this may be something that you might be able to answer, what would be, or maybe not right now, but what would be I guess a dollar figure that the average number of projects that come into a year that you would like to work on, what would that number be that if, starting from, in a fiscal year, 1,000 projects come in or whatever it is, or 500, what would that number be that you would need to, I guess, have in the for your stormwater budget?
Okay, I'm going to kind of give you the smart aleck answer first, okay, and that's how much do you got, right? Because from an infrastructure perspective, we can do bridges, roads, sidewalks, stormwater, water, wastewater. We can do as much as you give us to the point of contracting capability. So I don't really have a magic number other than we'll do as much as we can, because I think we've been really demonstrative that we've been successful with the projects we've done. So that's essentially what I'm trying here, is to start that conversation. I want a collective discussion about how much do we want to spend and how much can we spend, how much should we spend. And that begins, I think, with everyone understanding the scope of what we do. We do have a $207 million backlog, and that will grow because infrastructure ages each day. But we are in, I don't want to use the word competition because that's not the right word, but there are various demands on infrastructure capital, and it's just not just stormwater. So I don't want to be selfish, essentially, and demand a number without having the collective discussion. And that's essentially what I wanted to do tonight, is to kind of begin that. Because from an infrastructure perspective, water, especially wastewater, stormwater, we can spend it as fast as we can get it, and we can spend it responsibly. But how much is the magic question? It really is. But we can put people to work in a hurry.
And I think it's, the gas tax is supposed to be a user fee, that kind of thing. When you pay your water bill, that's going to your water, to Metro Water. Same thing with NES. And so stormwater, you kind of think of it as, yes, you're competing for infrastructure, but it's infrastructure that if the right funding mechanisms were put into place, that it could be somewhat self-funding. I mean, obviously, there's only so many roads you can build, but it sounds like for stormwater, you could clean every ditch in Davidson County twice a year, and we have fantastic ditches. But that's not what I'm talking about. Just to at least get at the backlog, because it sounds like y'all are doing remarkable work for the amount of money that you're given. That if you're the 4th largest MS4 in the country, and by the chart that was shown to us, you're the 5th lowest fee in the country, I think that's fairly out of whack.
You'll get no argument from me, but that's why we're here.
But I think, and I appreciate you having this discussion, because this is something I've been thinking on, is to try to get the stormwater division and our storm water in Davidson County to help pay for more of itself, instead of taking from, all of our budget is important, but this is something that could be somewhat self-funding. So I hope that the council starts having a discussion about that. I would ask the administration, the finance department, and you as director of Metro Water, start having that conversation more, because if we're the 4th largest in the country, but with the 5th lowest fee, I think that in and of itself shows how low that fee is, but also with the tremendous backlog that we will, even if nothing else is added now, we'll take. I mean, if we're doing $50 million every year for geo bonds, that's 20 years to knock that $200 million down. 14 and a half years if we just have the stormwater revenue coming in to pay for it. So I think for those two things, the tremendous backlog and the fact that we're so low, and we try to compare ourselves to other cities like Austin, Charlotte, but even Chattanooga has a larger fee than we do. So I would just ask the mayor's office and the rest of the council to start considering this. Thank you.
Councilmember Mina Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Potter, for presentation. And I would like to echo my colleague for thanking what a wonderful staff you have. In my district, I did have fair share of service order, and everybody, starting with John Honeysucker, and I would not name the name because I couldn't remember everybody's name, but everybody I encountered was so wonderful and so helpful, and thank you.
I appreciate you saying that. We have a lot of really cool people that work in
Yes,
Metro
indeed.
Water.
And my question is, because Nashville is a development boom and, still its city, so we are having lots of infill development, and I do appreciate you, some of the developer voluntarily taking low-impact development and also, adapting Metro stormwater regulation on fast 1-inch containment. And so as a not engineer, we understand Metro stormwater has requirement, but fast 1-inch containment is somewhat kind of up on the air. So if you would, in a way, probably elementary school student will understand kind of term, if you could explain how exactly what, fast 1-inch containment will do.
Okay, that's a great question, because it goes back to the 100-year flood question and all that kind of stuff. But the way I think about it is, if you look down, put yourself in a hot air balloon or whatever, and you look down on a parcel, and you draw a 1-inch barrier around it, and it rains, all that water that lands on that parcel is contained in that 1-inch barrier and is absorbed into the ground, and it does not exit the site. That's good from a quantity perspective, because it doesn't impact the adjacent property at all. It's also really important from a quality perspective, because if the water is essentially filtered through the ground and gets into the water table, nature is the world's best cleaner, and all the microbes and stuff will clean the water before it goes into the water table. So it's really in everyone's interest to keep that water on site. I think it's a really good rule. It's sometimes hard to engineer your way out of, but it's from a idealist perspective, it's a really good idea.
Thank you.
Would you mind speaking to, is a typical rain a 1-inch rain or less? And when we have those big gully washers, are those 1-inch rains or are those 10-inch rains?
Okay, I'll speak to a normal year because it hasn't rained in forever, but based on my 15 years of watching the watershed behave, we're not going to have a real issue unless you have about 2.5 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. That's a very general statement. Roger can go into enormous detail about specific watersheds and sub-watersheds because some, like Mill Creek, misbehaves, Whites Creek misbehaves in its lower reaches, Browns Creek misbehaves around the fairgrounds. So you're going to have variances in that. But really, if it's a normal year, the ground is normally saturated, and Roger, jump in if you disagree, about a 2.5-inch rain in 24 hours, and we'll have issues around Whites Creek, especially. That's kind of our bellwether. Mill Creek around Wimpole Drive. We have a really good idea of where that's going to happen. And, Roger, do you want to add anything to that? He's the expert on this one.
Each of our basins has its own characteristics, and unless we think we're getting more than about 2 inches of rain, we don't get real excited about tracking through the Nashville Safe program that we use to watch and monitor. We watch, if we get activated to the Emergency Operations Center, typically those of us that watch Nashville Safe and kind of watch the storms as they approach, we work with the National Weather Service, but about 2 inches of rain is kind of the trigger. If we're not expecting more than about 2 inches, then there's not a real reason for us to turn out for the Emergency Operations Center. We know which roads are going to flood first. If there's a lot of rain in Mill Creek, Bluff Road and Culbertson Road are going to get water in them before anything else happens in Mill Creek. So it's a matter of kind of what we've learned since the flood in 2010. We understand the characteristics of these drainage basins, and we have a pretty good handle on what to expect in them.
Thank you.
The good news is that when it's raining cats and dogs, there's at least 20 people sitting in their house, in a real nerdish way, looking at their phone and emailing back and forth and talking on the phone, and
Right.
We're all over it, believe me. So it's the Safe tool works great, and we have a lot of people watching when it's raining. And I'm really good friends with Chief White, and we're on the phone when we need to be. So as far as anything we've done since the flood, the Safe tool has been spectacular.
Relative to the 1 inch,
Yeah.
though, from the standpoint, separate the two issues, the threat of flooding relative to regulating 1 inch on an infill project.
And for us, it's the threat of the neighbor calling because their yard is flooding
Right.
from neighbor upstream.
That's exactly right.
And 1 inch is a very typical storm.
Is that cats and dogs, or is that just a
It's
steady rain?
not really. I mean, if it's, and it's all about intensity and duration. You
Right.
can get an inch over 6 hours, and that's not nearly as important as an inch in 1 hour. But typically, if we can infiltrate that first inch that falls from an infill perspective, we can pretty much control what's going to happen on neighboring properties. And then, too, the whole focus on low-impact development and the use of grassy swales and rain gardens and rain barrels and all those kinds of things work to help keep that water on the site. And, if you go back to the earliest of some of the infill, when I first started with Metro Water more than 8 years ago, an infill project was somebody tearing down a little ranch house and building a 6,000 square foot house in its place. Very different from what we see today, where we issue 150 permits a month for infill type projects.
Okay.
But the big challenge is to keep that water from impacting Great Aunt Ethel, who still lives next door, and she's never had water in her basement until that new house went in next door. So
Exactly.
an inch is good for that.
Thanks, Roger.
Councilmember Withers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Potter. The two biggest issues that my constituents in District 6 have contacted me about, two of the biggest, are tree replacements with infill housing as well as litter. And so I know there is a lot of concern in the East Nashville area that with infill housing taking place and demolitions, that a lot of mature trees are being lost. And neighbors have noticed that even though there is an existing ordinance that requires the replacement of two 2-inch caliper trees for every, one for every 30 feet of street frontage, a typical lot in my area is 50, so that's why we usually look to see 2. And they've noticed that in many cases, houses have been permitted by codes and use and occupancy permits have been issued, and the trees have never been replaced in many cases. And obviously, trees are a great natural feature that helps us to soak up water before it enters the storm system. Is there any opportunity for Metro Water Services inspectors or staff to maybe assist our neighbors or codes with helping to escalate that issue?
Short answer is we'd love to help. One thing we don't want to do is become code inspectors, because that's not our expertise. What I will do is I'll talk to Terry Cobb and see what we can do to help. Generally speaking, we're on the site, and if we see something, the least we can do is point it out. So we will do that.
Okay, well, I'd really appreciate that. The other thing, too, with litter issues, you mentioned, I think, that there's like a list of hotspot locations. Is that something that's available?
Sure. Yeah, we can send you our rain routes.
Well, there's a couple of reasons that I ask about that. One is that if there is a problem area that may not be on that list, then maybe
That'd be perfect.
we might want to let you know about that.
Absolutely.
But another thing too, with as it pertains to litter, is that we are the beneficiaries in some of our urban neighborhoods of having more and more pedestrians, and that's a good thing to have more folks on the streets. But we do have neighbors that are more aware of litter issues in some of our neighborhoods, and obviously if those items are tossed on the ground, they're going to go down a storm drain. And a lot of our neighbors have begun commenting on a real lack in Nashville of public garbage cans along streets, which many other cities have. And so we're sort of trying to find a way to identify where that is creating a problem for the city, that it might help us to justify some sort of an expense or a policy of strategically where we can place those if we can't place them everywhere, if maybe we can make those available in some areas where it's obviously causing a problem.
We'd be very supportive. One of the things that makes me really, really mad is seeing someone toss a cigarette butt out the window, because it's just like they're throwing it in the river. I'd love to have more receptacles. I'd love to have people use them.
Okay, well, thank you. I would really appreciate seeing that list if that's available,
Oh, yeah.
and continuing that conversation. Really
We'll send
appreciate
that to you tomorrow.
Thank you. Councilmember Van Rees.
Thank you very much. A couple of things. The FEMA buyout and the maintenance of some of the structures that are going to be demolished and removed. I've gotten some questions about now what exactly is going to happen there, and who's going to maintain it, and will trees be planted, or how is that going to look?
What we generally do is when we're required to do specific abatement. So before you take a house down, you got to do lead abatement, asbestos abatement to rule. Then we tear it down, and then we try to restore it to its, I guess, condition as if the house wasn't there. And then when we get a collection of those properties together, what we don't do is fence it off. And we'll work with the neighborhood if they want to do tree plantings, if they want to do a neighborhood garden, that kind of stuff. Because the last thing we want to do is just mow it. If the neighborhood has a use that they'd like to do, we'd love to participate. The holy grail for us is to create a park, because that's the best thing for that land. And we try our best to collect those parcels together and give them to parks and let them mow it. So, but the short answer is, if the neighborhood wants to do a specific thing with a piece of property, then we'd love to hear it, and we'd love to work with parks to make it happen.
So those are ideal opportunities for those pocket parks that
Absolutely.
we've heard about.
Absolutely.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
The other thing also in our area, of course, with the expansion of the USD, the idea of street cleaning is a new thing for some of the folks up in the Northeast corridor. Yeah, in Madison. And I'm wanting to kind of hear a little bit more about how many, and I don't know whether or not the folks in finance would have an idea off the top of their head or not, as to how many extra miles of street cleaning are anticipated in but trying to keep in front of that. I know that both Councilman Pridemore and Mr. Davis and I are expecting to have community conversations in regard to where street lighting will go. At the same time, an education process in regard to street cleaning and its benefit will be in order. So
We'll have to do that analysis to get that to you.
fabulous. Thank you very much.
Ricky, did you write that down?
Councilmember Leonardo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to, as a newer council person, I would like to say that, and echo what Councilman Elrod said, I did take the one-day tour. It was awfully informative. I've lived in Nashville my entire life, didn't realize how much you guys did. It seems like you do as much, if not more, than any other department, but you guys do it well and do a good job of it.
Thanks.
Even today, when we had the fire in Beeman Park, I talked to Mr. Honeysucker, and Metro Water had the ability to help the fire department with water because there's not fire hydrants out there. And again, so thank you. But and I just had a few questions. Do you have an amount or a number that if the stormwater fees went up, say $1, that would give you parity? Is there an amount that you see as or a percentage increase that would fix this?
Well, and the short answer is no, because the way the current structure is set up, it's tiered between essentially residential and commercial. So the residential has 3 tiers, then you have condos, and then you have 5 tiers for commercial. So there's a wide iteration of changes you can make, and that was part of the discussion that we need to have collectively, is to see if we want to change that structure, and if so, how. Do we want to do a new structure? That's part of the process about identifying how much revenue you want to generate. So generally speaking, if we're given a target number and a method, we can give you that number. But we have to have both of those entering arguments to kind of give you that answer.
And can we get that information to the amount of stormwater fees generated by those separate classes?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. And in your opinion, are the larger buildings in Metro paying more or less than the average residential fare?
It's based on impervious surface, they're not paying as much because it's not a pure relationship. So that's something that I think is a valid discussion, is how much are people paying per impervious surface. So there is a tiered system in that the more impervious surface you have, the more you pay. But I think that's a discussion topic if it's adequate.
And then, finally, and again, I'm still new, obviously, but, you have Metro Water over here, you've got stormwater over here, and this proposed flood wall is in the Metro Water capital improvements. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And since that was, based upon a 1,000-year flood, has there been any thought about, maybe robbing Peter to pay Paul or encumbering one for the other as a potential answer to the problem with stormwater?
They have to be a separate revenue stream. And that's state law. I mean, we can't mix them.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Welcome.
Councilmember Pridemore.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Director. Appreciate you being here. Councilor Van Rees asked most of the questions concerning the purchase of the houses in there along the creek, Gibson Creek.
And that's a perfect, greenway opportunity right there.
Yes, and we've had several inquiries of what would become of that property and what type of projects would be eligible to be on that property. So we thank you for that. Just one other question: that money, that was federal money, I guess back from. It's not part of the money that was reimbursed to Metro for the flood of 2010.
The Gibson Creek buyout was hazard mitigation funding. So that is federal. It's federal, state, and local. There's sharing there. The $5 million that the council approved in the last capital budget is home buyout, but it's not. But it's exclusively Metro funds. The way your homes in your district, it was what's essentially left over, not necessarily from the flood, but from a disaster declaration. Because to have those funds available, you have to have a declaration of a disaster first. And that's what that was from.
Those houses were definitely part of a disaster.
Agreed. Roger mentioned that, but your watershed, that took 9 inches of rain in 4 hours. So it was crazy. I mean, that was a more intense storm than the May 2010.
Yep. Well, thank you. And the other thing, the demolished, when those, now, is that part of the funding also, is
Yes.
having them demolished?
Yep.
And Public Works does that, or
No,
is
we
that?
do it.
Oh, you do it?
It's a great way to spend the day. You come to
Yeah.
work and you go tear the house down. So the crews really enjoy doing that.
Well, we in Madison, thank you for doing that.
We're all about it.
And I want to appreciate Engineer Ricky Swift. I call him on a weekly basis for assistance, so he's been very cooperative.
Yeah, Ricky's a good man.
Very helpful, so I want to thank you. And people along Gibson Creek, thank you too.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Karen Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Allen. Director Potter, wow.
We've had
I
this
have so
conversation
much
before, haven't we?
positive to say about you now. You and your department have been actually very helpful, have worked tremendously hard with me and my constituents. So things have improved tremendously, most especially with the hiring of John Honeysucker. He has been excellent in following up and following through on many of the questions that, that I was receiving previously. I also want to thank Ricky Swift for going above and beyond in helping the constituents out there in Nashville Woods with the extensive stormwater project that you completed there. They're very, very grateful. It has provided a lot of relief. So we see light at the end of the tunnel, and we are just very thankful for your leadership and for all of the continued improvements in the department in terms of communication.
Thank you.
On the report about the future stormwater projects, is the Owendale area still going to be at least considered to be looked at in terms of maybe installing storm drains or something along that stretch, since that was the only area that was affected by the 2010 flood?
I can't speak specifically to that project, but I will talk to Ricky about that first thing in the morning, and we'll call you and let you know what the status is on that.
Okay, because I know there's a lot of complexity in that, but I, still have constituents over in that area that just want to look at still what are some of the other options for water drainage in that area.
Yes, ma'am.
But I know you all are continually working on that, and I and others appreciate that greatly. But thank you, Mr. Potter. I think you're doing an excellent job. I have to echo our mayor, Megan Berry, who just really respects and adores you greatly because you have a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, and we're thankful for that.
Thank you. We work with a lot of really cool people.
Councilmember Angie Henderson.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to ask a second question. I wanted to build off of what Councilman Withers was inquiring about as it related to tree protection.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there are other questions about, subsequent to the build, the trees that are added. But I wonder on the front end, a lot of what I am seeing is insufficient protection of mature trees on sites when you have infill construction. So again, to Councilman Withers' point, massive trees, great root system, really important for water retention. But I understand that our urban forester does not really have for, single and two family construction, a part of that process. And so I wonder, as it seems to be related to stormwater, when you're going out on that point of inspection we were talking about earlier to examine the silt fence and make sure, I wonder if there's an opportunity there for tree protection fencing to check the box on that and get that under y'all's umbrella. Do you think that would be appropriate, or?
Appropriate may be a little strong.
Okay.
Because one of the things that we're really careful about at Metro Water is that we do what we do, and we do it really well. We're not codes inspectors, because we're not trained to do that. And while we're, jokingly tree huggers, because we're very zealous about our environmental care, we're not expert in that either. What I will do is we'll talk to the urban forester, who's a staff of one,
Right.
and
Understood.
and see what we can help.
I appreciate that because it just seems that piece is floating out there and codes isn't addressing it, y'all aren't addressing it, and because of that, the trees aren't appropriately protected. They park on them during the job site, they pile up things on them. And I understand some sites are so constrained,
Yeah.
You just acknowledge that's potentially going to be a loss.
No, I think it's a valid point, Council Lady. It's, a big tree is a beautiful thing, and it should be protected.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I would add to that, we worked when we were doing the stormwater infill regulation to try to come up with a way to quantify how existing mature trees could be part of that retaining 1 inch. I'd love to continue that conversation. If we could get that officially as a way to meet your infill requirements, then that's an incentive to hang on to those.
Did you speak with Rebecca about that, Council Lady?
Not Rebecca. Jennifer Smith and I kept throwing it out at the general meeting, but
We'll get Rebecca
that'd be great.
to work with you on that.
Excellent. Thank you. Councilmember Jerry McElmurray, second time around.
Yes, and I'll be real quick. Has there been any recent study done either by you or the Finance Department about looking at Nashville's stormwater fee, comparing it to peer cities, how perhaps, recalibrating the fee structure? Has there been any recent study done on something like that?
That chart you have is a direct result of that. So we've got all that data, and we can share it with you. We know everything we need to know about our stormwater fee, its structure, how it compares. So I feel very good about essentially beginning the discussions with y'all about how it's structured and the options we have, because I think we have a lot of options, and I'd like to explore them in pretty significant detail. So we do have that ready to go.
So if there needed to be a committee meeting tomorrow to talk about what the fee structure would be, what the numbers would be in the different levels, you would have all the data that you would need to do that, you believe?
Generally speaking, I'd be pretty close.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Withers for the second time.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me speak a second time. Mr. Potter, for the sewer and sanitary deconflicting process, where is Metro in that process of separating those systems? I recall that being an issue a few years ago that Metro embarked on, and I just wanted to, because I was present as a neighborhood person at that time, wanted to see if there's any information available about where we are in separating those systems, and in particular, I'm really interested to know where we are in that process as it pertains to especially a lot of the infill housing that's going on.
Right.
Are we building over an opportunity to correct something where with new buildings going in and that not being corrected underground, that we may not have an opportunity to address that again? And so any information about that would be appreciated.
You're speaking of our Clean Water Nashville program, and that's specifically to stormwater. It's the long-term control plan on the combined system. The other part of that is the capital action plan engineering report on the sanitary system. The summary is we're doing a really good job. We've got very good data to show that we're making significant improvements, especially in the sanitary system. On the combined system, we haven't done as much work on that because our discussions with EPA haven't concluded. But what I'll do, Ron Taylor, the lead engineer on that, will call you, and he will overwhelm you with as much information as you can stand, because he's an expert, and we've got all the data, annual audits. We can show you everything you want to know. It's on the website as well, but Mr. Taylor can dazzle you with his brilliance.
Well, Mr. Taylor's one of my constituents, so I'm sure he'd love to speak to me about it.
There you go.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I don't see any others in the queue. I only have one more, if I might ask that one. Mr. Potter, can you explain how the commercial paper process ties in with our bonding capacity and how much we have left there? And does that help with this issue, or are we already up against that as well?
The short answer to that is no. I'm not a finance expert, so I'm going to ask Talia if you can address that, or should we get that to you tomorrow?
I can get the details of that to you tomorrow, but we are getting close to our maximum capacity to roll that over into bonds.
Okay, thank you. So I don't see any other questions in the queue. I'm just going to run back through the things that we asked for and make sure they're on somebody's list. Councilmember Hagar asked for financial information on something. I wasn't writing at that point. Can you remind me what that was? Hold on.
On yet?
You're on.
Okay. The amount that we're spending to private vendors and private engineering firms versus how much we're spending in-house.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Okay, and then Councilmember Van Reese had asked about additional miles of street cleaning in the new USD. Councilmember Leonardo had asked how many how much stormwater is generated by each different tier. Councilmember Karen Johnson had asked about the Owensboro area in the buyout.
Owendale.
Owendale. Thank you, Owendale. Great. Councilmember Henderson had asked about talking to the urban forester about preserving mature trees. Councilmember Withers had asked about talking to the urban forester about planting the new trees. And I had asked to speak to Rebecca Doan about including those as an infill solution. And Councilmember Withers had another question about the sanitary and stormwater separation. Ron Taylor's going to get that information. And then the question about the commercial paper. I think that was all the things we'd asked for. Councilmember Elrod. Perhaps? Yes, sir.
Just real quick, could you send out the presentation to everyone? And then also the study that you just mentioned about the stormwater fees, could you also send that out to everyone? And then I'm sure it's on your website, but any, one pager on the current fee structure and the different levels and that kind of thing. I guess that could go along with Councilman Leonardo's information as well, just so we have all that information so we can start considering that.
Great.
Thank you all.
May I make one concluding remark, Chair?
Absolutely.
We're all about visiting, and a lot of y'all have taken tours of our water and wastewater facilities, but we'd love for you to spend a day in the life of stormwater because it would be very illuminating about what actually goes on. Maybe a day with, not a day, but maybe a couple hours with the crew. I think going out to the Metro office building and seeing the development process would be very interesting to see, number one, the scope of what goes on, and then to see what Ricky has to do every day from his perspective. I'd love for y'all to spend some time with him because, he's got a lot to do, and he has, varying demands and varying supplies. So I'd love to invite y'all to visit.
And we would arrange that through Mr. Honeysucker, correct?
You would.
Okay, we'll be talking to you. Any other questions? If not, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, Mr. Potter.
You're welcome.